Welcome back to the Sabbath at Midnight. I am your host, Dominic Tavares. And tonight we have a very interesting topic with Paul Stobbs out of the UK. And we're going to discuss the Nephilim look like clowns. Your first take on that is probably a little bit like, what? Clowns? Well, yes. And Paul will get into this. He will break it down. And it's going to be a very interesting show on who these Nephilim giants, why did they look like clowns? That's my question. You can find us on the Sabbath at Midnight on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And let's get Paul on here. Paul Stobbs from the UK. Please let the listeners know where to find you and so they can follow you or subscribe.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Yeah, sure. If anyone wants to follow my work, it's all on YouTube. So all they would have to do is type in "understanding conspiracy," and they should find my six-pointed logo, yellow, blue, and red, and just follow it from there. There's a playlist on my channel which is called "The Nephilim Look Like Clowns." There's 35 episodes to the series now, spanning over 6 years. With a little break in the middle. So I had a good 2-year stint of producing 17 episodes, and I've come back producing the other 15 episodes over the past year. So yeah, YouTube is the place to find me. I also have a Telegram group by the same name, if anyone's interested in joining in with that chat as well. But that's all I can say for introductions there.
Very nice. Very nice. So Paul, let us know how you got into this space regarding the Nephilim giants and their clown like features and so forth.
Sure. So I didn't originally start out my research and my channel with the intention to talk about this topic. I kind of came into this as a New Age type Gnostic truth back in the day before I was born again and found Christ through my research. And I was kind of just the guy who covered anything and everything to do with conspiracy theories, you know. I was not one to really, commit to anything in particular, but I did love basically taking every conspiracy to its final conclusion. You know, that's kind of was my process. And I would just speculate and humor the ideas to the end of whatever those ideas were. And through the process of doing that, you learn a thing or two. And like I said, I came to Christianity and Christ through it. And during that time, I was basically doing a lot of research into biblical history to do with the Nephilim and demons and the antediluvian age. People like Rob Skiba were quite a large influence for me, and authors like Gary Wayne, who wrote the Genesis 6 conspiracy. So, I've been doing this for a while by this point. I've been doing it for about a good 3-4 years, and I started to go down this biblical history route, really. And obviously during that time, I was going through a transition period myself, coming out of the New Age, dropping psychedelic use and all that kind of stuff, heavily into the whole geometry aspect of things and the exploration of consciousness angle. I was coming away from religiously listening to Alan Watts and Terence McKenna and all these New Age thinkers and philosophers from the 70s through to the 90s. And I kind of obviously more solidifying my faith in Jesus and the Bible and coming out of that age into this new thing is I'd learned a thing or two about the DMT experience, and I'd always heard people were always talking about experiencing these jesters or these machine elves, as they were described, when people were doing this psychedelic drug. And I think I'll expound more on that later. I'll summarize it quickly here. That was one of my first clues that there was something suspicious about the entities in this dimension people were exploring, which was quite bizarre, quite psychedelic and funky looking, and something akin to clowns. And then towards this period while I was kind of swimming in this world of antediluvian age of angels mating with humans and the Book of Enoch and creating these giants, and I was in that kind of world. The clown sightings happened in 2016, And it was just such a strange thing for me, as somebody had a channel talking about conspiracies, I felt like I couldn't really leave this.
Mm-hmm.
There was something strange about the whole thing, because all local media and news outlets in the mainstream had picked up on this story. And it's like they wanted us to see it. They wanted us to notice this strange concept of a clown appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the night to scare people as a nationwide, even worldwide phenomena, because it was happening over in Europe as well as it was in America. And I just couldn't let that slide in my mind. That kind of stuck with me, that idea of clowns are appearing everywhere, and the mainstream wants us to see it. So on the back of that, I had many strange experiences, like I said, going through this process of coming to God. Many spiritual attacks, spiritual oppression, demonic oppression, and I'd been visited one night by a mysterious entity known as the Hat Man, which had led me down a whole other rabbit hole of research into shadow entities, and I was swimming in demonic lore, trying to figure out how to fight these things and how they operate, basically. Derek Prince was actually a huge influence for me as well during that time. So I'm not a church-going Christian. I wasn't raised Christian, so I don't necessarily speak Christianese, and I might not seem like a typical Christian with the way I talk and act to somebody, let's say, who was raised in the faith. So I know I've been born again now for maybe 6 years, maybe. So I'm relatively new in my faith in that respect. But I was still in this phase of how do I get these demons out of my life, So I was swimming in that world, and everything kind of just all came together one day. And after this clown sighting thing, and this rise of like the Joker archetype in the world, everything was just a joke to everybody all of a sudden. And the whole Trump presidency thing was going on as well, and Pepe the Frog was kind of rising in popularity, and this whole meme culture was around. And something just led me to basically type into YouTube one day, Nephilim and clowns. Something just clicked. I don't know what it was. I just searched, and I found one video, and it was a parody video of a conspiracy theorist. So it was somebody pretending to be a conspiracy theorist, and they'd made this video basically making a mockery of people who believe in conspiracies. And he was talking about the Nephilim. And then after describing the Nephilim as having pale skin and red hair in his video, he then jumps to this conclusion in like a crazy conspiracy theorist way, like the Nephilim are actually interdimensional killer clowns from out of space, and he was really going into it hard to try and make us look incredibly foolish for even believing in the Nephilim, to begin with. And I listened to him say that, and I actually thought to myself, like, although he's taking the mick out of us, he's actually onto something there, So I started to do my own deep dive into this, and here I am, 6 years later, and I've got this 35 episode series that basically goes on to prove that. And not only did the Nephilim have clown-like features as we would describe it today in the West, but the Western image of a clown actually has its roots in the representation of the wild men of Europe and demonic entities. And not only that, but the modern Western image of a red-haired, white-faced circus clown was in fact invented by those within secret societies and Freemasonry. So there's a quick summary. I'll leave you to, if you have any questions or anything you want to ask, and then we can get into it.
Well, the clowns, I was doing a little bit of researching here. It seems they go back to, according to this page I found, the 5th century dynasty of Egypt around 2400 BC. And basically, it goes on here. It says, Peter Berger writes, it seems plausible that folly and fools like religion and magic meet some deeply rooted needs in human society. So basically, what it says here is these clowns, the roles of the priest and clown have been held. They were held by the same persons. I mean, I didn't know that this goes back all the way to actually in Egypt. That's That's wild.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The see what you're referring to there is this thing that people call in mainly the New Age. It's a New Agey language term, but it's the jester archetype, and it's kind of like a symbolic character that has been throughout history. And it's this person who's willing to mock society and play the fool, and even mock the leadership and the king and the archonic rulership of whatever era that is.
Right.
And they kind of have the permission to do so. And people have argued, the court jester within the kingly realm is there to keep the king humble and grounded and down to earth, because the jester is the only one permitted to mock the king, And that's one thing, acting like a jester or a clown is one thing in its own right, and that has been practiced for millennia, like I said, since Egypt. So there's always been the fool within society who is kind of outside of society. In a way, it's not dissimilar from in let's say Eastern religions. In Taoism, you've got the bodhisattva, who's kind of like an individual who's found enlightenment and kind of lives outside of society, but has decided to join society once more,
right,
knowing the truth that it's all an illusion. You know what I mean? And they play the role of this person who turns systems on its head. You'll find in, like I said, ancient Hopi practices. I think that's is it within Nevada, the Hopi tribe in America? I forget off the top of my head now, but
yeah.
They have their own clown, a sacred clown, they would call it. And sacred clowning, like I said, is akin to shamanism within cultures all around the world. But within this particular practice, the clown is a deeply necessary character in the societal hierarchy of the system. It is, like you said, it's there kind of to make people see the folly in reality, in a sense, not take things too seriously. Because life is harsh, life is brutal. And I think it added some levity to the otherwise brutal nature of existence to a lot of these tribes. But what I've observed with my own research, and this is where things get kind of away from this jester archetype ideal, is that these entities that once ruled the earth, these giants, shall we say, these offspring of fallen angels mating with humans, these children of the gods, these demigods within the pantheons of society, they literally had features that were what we would describe as clownish. It's quite literal as well. It's not about the metaphorical meaning of a jester and what that does to society. I'm being extremely literal with my research. They actually looked like clowns. So let me give you a quick rundown of what's going on here. Sure. Exactly. So if we go way back to the beginning here, so this is all from a biblical perspective. I make no secret that that's where my research comes from, but it can be corroborated with other myths and stories outside of the biblical canon, which back up this idea, and that's what my book's going to be all about. But if you look at the story of how the Nephilim came to be, we're told in Genesis 6, very briefly, that the sons of God came down and mated with the daughters of men, or the daughters of Cain. And they produced offspring, which became giants. It also describes them as mighty men, men of renown, or the men of old. And these did become the heroes of the age initially. They were defeating things like giant, horrible lizards, dragons, things like that. Gilgamesh was, for example, in the Mesopotamian, Akkadian kind of culture of Sumeria, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's known as somebody who was a demigod, in a sense, striving for immortality.
Right.
And he did fight a lot of monsters along the way and become idolized as a god, as someone to look up to and to venerate. But that was going on all over the earth, everywhere, within every single culture. It wasn't just specific to these one few stories that we actually have in the mainstream popular view of history. So these things existed, and they were very big, and they were, I suppose, helpful at first, but the appetites very quickly got away from them, and the humans couldn't sustain them anymore. So what we found is that after positioning themselves into rulership positions, they became kings and rulers of this antediluvian age, this pre-flood world. Just by the sheer nature of their size, that they became these rulers. I mean, who can stand in front of a giant and stand up to it realistically? So it makes sense that they became the rulers. But the world became incredibly corrupt through their leadership. sponsored by these angels who created them to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And this all goes to a part of the rebellion, Lucifer's rebellion as well, the rebellion of the angels against God's order, God's decision to put Adam above them. The Watchers are a different class of angels to Lucifer's rebellion, but they were certainly influenced by Lucifer in the rebellion to do what they did. So obviously, fast forwarding, it came to a point where the punishment for these angels was to watch their children kill each other off. So there's this epic battle that happened where all the giants fought with each other and started to murder each other. And I think from their perspective, it was more of power struggles to be the only rulers on earth, But the angels had to watch as their children not only tried to kill each other, but also tried to kill them because they didn't want gods above them. And this has been stylized in like the Greek mythology of, let's say, the Clash of the Titans. That's the same story being told from a different pantheistic pagan perspective, I suppose. But once this battle was over and the giants were wiped out, there was this period of about 120 years just before the flood came, where mankind, still rebellious, still lusting after the power that was given to them by the angels and these giants, they too started to, and I've coined a phrase here, Nephilimify themselves. And they started to turn themselves into hybrid beings by mixing themselves with animals and other species to gain the power from them in many ways. It's actually, funny enough, it's said in the Book of Enoch that the women who did mate with the fallen angels became sirens in the end. So they became half woman, half fish, or half woman, half bird. And it's clear in extra canonical books, apocryphal books like Jasher particularly, that this mixing of kinds did go on just before the flood. And that's why the flood came. It was to reset everything because all flesh had become corrupted,
Mm-hmm, true.
So this is a very quick Cliff Notes summarization of antediluvian history here. But the flood comes. Noah and his sons obviously survive afterwards. There's many hypotheses and stories and evidences around the earth outside of the biblical canon that does suggest that Nephilim did survive the flood. I know that's contentious to say to most Christians, but I don't believe it contradicts the Bible when I say that, because I don't think these creatures that survived have the breath of life in them like a human being does. I think Noah and his family truly were the only truly living things left. I think obviously a lot of Nephilim were described as the Rephaim after the flood, and that is translated as the dead ones for good reason. But anyway, that controversial statement aside, there's many ways the Nephilim could have arrived after the flood that doesn't have to contradict the Bible as well. There's the idea that the corruption was still within the wives of the children of Noah, and therefore the Nephilim DNA corruption made its way eventually through the lineages of them. And then obviously there's just the plain old second incursion theory where the angels came back and just mated with women again and created more giants. Irregardless of how it happened, we know for a fact from reading the Old Testament that giants were indeed in the lands of Canaan. Most of the Old Testament is battles against them, from Moses through to David, you know what I mean, and Saul as well, and Joshua. They were nothing but epic battles against these huge men. So the giants were before the flood, and they were after that. It's undeniable, as far as I'm concerned, and we do find all throughout history, all over the earth, their footprint is everywhere.
Mm-hmm, true.
All cultures, and this is where my research comes into it. All folk traditions of every country within every continent and every tribe within these continents, within each region, with their own dialects and language and styles, all the folk traditions venerate and still worship the spirits of the now dead Nephilim. And my work is set out to prove that that's what they're doing through the aesthetical similarities between the traditional garbs they choose to wear when trying to evoke the spirit to the ceremony they're performing. So this literally is every single continent all over the earth. You can compare all the folk traditions, and they have this practice which we describe as ancestor worship. Now, when they say ancestor worship, they aren't worshipping grandma and granddad or your great-great uncle, okay? They are worshipping what they believe are the ancestors of their civilization, the ancient kings and rulers that were now dead and in spirit form, the Nephilim. That's basically what my work has set out to prove. So again, I'll stop there. I think I have to give a quick summary of where my thought process is and how I am being literal. Right. And I think through examples of observing certain cultures around the world, you'll find that their garb has clown-like features that we have incorporated into our own image of a Western clown. But we'll also discuss how those features are actually inherited from their parents, the angelic beings who created them to begin with. So I'll leave it there for now.
Well, sure, that makes sense, because in 1 Enoch 8:1, we read that Azazel taught the art of ornaments and bracelets and beautifying the eyelids and all kinds of, it says costly stones and coloring tinctures. Mm-hmm. So for me, when I read that, it's possible that these giants did wear makeup. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was some type of way to, I don't know, honor their forefathers, which probably would have been Azazel and the original Fallen Watchers. Maybe that's what they did. They wore makeup, some kind of war paint image. I don't know.
No, I have heard that one. I think it's highly likely they did. And obviously ordained themselves with all sorts of things like gold and diamonds and precious stones, just like Lucifer is described as being ordained with every precious stone too. I think as well that it's interesting, the whole teaching, the makeup, art of makeup thing, because you'll find in the West, we consider that as a way of beautifying yourself to deceive somebody or to attract a mate, let's say. But I think it was a lot more practical then. I think the art of dressing yourself up in a certain way and applying colors to your skin in a certain way, like a lot of tribal and folk traditional cultures do, is a way of venerating and evoking certain spirits. I think the practice of beautifying yourself with tinctures and colors and makeup was actually a witchcraft tool being taught to humanity, that if you want to bring a spirit into your vessel, you need to dress and look like the spirits you want to inhabit you.
Right.
And I think that's what they were truly trying to teach there. It was a witchcraft lesson, basically. Because we find that, let's say just off the cuff, one example. I will pull one example. Let's go to Haitian culture, okay, and look at Vodou, the practices they have there. They have their own pantheon of gods, which they believe is a family, a hierarchical family. And I think the patriarch of that, or at least one of the patriarchs of this family, is known as Baron Samedi. So I think it's Baron Saturday, I think. Was it Sunday? I think it's Saturday. And anyway, what they do in Haitian practice is they dress like this entity. And then what they do while dressing like the entity to offer things to him is they smoke cigars and drink rum. So they believe that that's what this entity loves to have. And they do what they do specifically with the sole intention of being possessed by Baron Samedi. So what they do is they wear the big top hats, they wear the purple suit with the black pinstripes, and they paint their face to look like a skeleton, like a dead entity, a ghost face, we'll call it, and that's what they're doing there. They are intentionally dressing like something which they know is a spirit in order to allow the spirit into their body. And that is the practice as every folk tradition understands it. There's no mistaking the reasoning behind why they do it. However, in the West, when we dress up like something, we don't consider such consequences to our actions. So something as trivial to us as, let's say, Halloween.
Right. Oh, yeah. Halloween. Yeah, we had Gary Wayne on for that one.
Yeah, where we would dress up, let's say, as monsters or ghosts or spirits of all kinds. Although it seems silly to us, that's something people would do in these folk traditions to bring spirits into them for purposeful possession. And they believe they gain things from doing it, information, mainly power, wealth, and the ability to harm themselves and not actually get injured, and mainly information on how to solve certain problems or how to get out of a certain situation or to gain wealth, or it's divination, it's witchcraft is what it is.
Divination, right.
But you'll find that I've said one example, there are thousands. A lot of other cultures see it slightly differently. A lot of other cultures dress like entities to scare away evil entities. And I don't believe that's true. I think that's a very naive and stupid way of viewing the practice. I don't think dressing like a demon scares away a demon, personally.
No.
And it just seems trivial to me and kind of a foolish thing to do. And that's mainly our Western cultures who believe that. In our Western folk traditions, let's say the Wilderman of Europe is a good example, and the Wildman tradition goes across every country in Europe. It's not just specific to Bulgaria, where they have the biggest festival towards it. And they believe, you dress like these spirits to ward away the spirits, to scare away the spirits and protect your village. But that's not what other people do in other practices far older. They dress like a spirit to invite the spirit.
That's not true.
And I think the older tradition is more true in this respect. And again, the ignorance abounds with all these practices. But one thing that I can say for certain is whether it's in India or whether it's in Australia or whether it's in the continent of Asia, from Siberia all the way down to China, all across the Americas, north, south, and even all the random islands in the Pacific, they all have the exact same practices and features within their oldest traditions. And that is to dress like the spirits, to invite them to the village or within the individual through the shaman, in order to attract them, be possessed by them, and gain favors and knowledge. And the practice is the same. And it applies to me. There was a global event, something happened in the past that all of these cultures remember. And if you look at the way they dress, though there's minor differences, the larger aesthetical similarities are undeniable.
Right.
And it's where we get all the features for a modern day clown from. So I could break down a modern day clown for you, just so you can understand.
Well, yeah, just
where I'm getting at,
Just really quick. I mean, generally clowns have the red hair. That's where they're predominantly, the iconography is red hair. And we go back to America, North America here, and the natives, I think it was a Paiute who fought the Sitika, that were red-haired giants. There's red-haired giants in Ireland. They were called the Tuatha De Danann.
That's right.
And the list goes on. And there's also the blonde race and blue-eyed race, which were coined the Amorites, the Canaanites. And what's fascinating is, yes, you are absolutely correct, and I agree with you 100% that clown-faced makeup, that was a learned thing that passed on through generations, much like oral traditions are passed on from ancient cultures. And and it's fascinating. This is why I wanted to get you on and speak on this. The Nephilim look like clowns, because it's fascinating. We tie that all into Enoch, and even the Egyptians. I mean, even the men were depicted as having eyeliner on and makeup, and that's just wild. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. And you look at the Hispanic traditions of, I think it's called Dia de los Muertos or Muertas. They paint their faces too. It's all white, kind of like clown-like. And
so the Day of the Dead rituals,
the Dead,
you'll find a lot of the Hispanic countries and the Portuguese countries in South America as well, like Brazil, with Carnival. The Carnival of Europe it's an ancient practice that goes way back to the worship of Dionysus, which was known as Bacchus in the Roman religion, the god of wine, theater, sex, frivolity, partying, basically everything sinful under the sun you can imagine, involved with basically the sins of the flesh, is what Dionysus was a representation of through and through. And the Greek god pantheons, I believe they're just analogous to watchers and fallen angels, basically creating demigods, raping women, raping other gods, I don't know, changing form and shape to do such things, pretending to be the husbands of kings and things like that. And I looked into my own research for this in the book, and I expound a lot of it in the book. But during this period where they became the kings and rulers, these Nephilim hybrids, these children of gods became the kings, you'll find that the gods were legitimately producing heirs within kingdoms by raping the wives of the king. That was a lot of that was going on in the Greek stories. I think I broke down about 10 different separate occasions in which that happened through the Greek pantheon. So the fallen angels were were intentionally breeding these monsters into positions of power.
Right.
It's an agenda, you know, and Gary Wayne breaks it down perfectly in his book, you know. And I could not do justice to the amount of research that man has done on this topic. It is so extensive. You know, you mentioned the Tuatha De Danann, for example, and, you know, they battled against the Fomorians, which were this deformed race of hideous beings, you know. But even the Tuatha De Danann themselves weren't good people, you know. They were tyrants. They were tyrannical rulers who came and dominated that land and then swiftly left, you know what I mean, after being defeated themselves. And they were described, you know, especially within Irish folk tradition and the Celtic traditions all across Europe. You know, that this red-haired, pale skin iconography is just seeped within it. You know, you mentioned the giants of Lovelock Cave within the Paiute traditions in North Americas. You know, the North Americas, all the tribes talk about giants that settled there, that the tribes had to battle with continuously,
the
driving
mound
them out of
builders.
the land. You know.
Yeah, the mound builders fighting against a race that could only be identified. This is way back then, you know, the ethnographers didn't know anything really about giants or too much of that. But they only identified this other race as Mayans. They were fair-skinned that fought the mound builders. And there was like 75,000 bones within like so many acres. It was a massacre. And I forget the ethnographer's name, but I believe it was in the 1800s that he wrote this. That there was a battle, and the mound builders were obviously, they were a giant tribe, as Abraham Lincoln noted in his speech at Niagara Falls, that there was once a species of giants that once gazed upon these lands. These were the mound builders. So even Abraham Lincoln knew about it, but for some reason, as a people, as we move forward through future, now everything's just like, okay, well, giants never existed.
Well, some would say it's a conspiracy to hide it, you know.
But why though? Why though? Is that because that will diffuse the whole Darwin evolution, which I think is just bogus?
No, absolutely.
The missing link, and you know, we look at Bigfoot. A lot of people are, you know, we do a few podcasts here on Bigfoot with Ron Moorhead and some other people. And in my opinion, Paul, I just think that's just a horite, a cave dweller, something that it's a remnant from the Old Testament times. I've actually written about that in my book just recently, about these remnants that may have survived the culling of the lands of Canaan. You know, so when Israel was given the diktat to take back those lands, right, and, you know, dwell in them, I think after hearing that a bunch of humans were just decimating these giants, I think certain giants heard this and were like, I'm getting out of here. You know, and I do think many of them did flee to certain places all over the earth, including the North Americas, to get as far away from that Middle Eastern region as they possibly can, to flee their death, basically, the God-given mandate for them to die. And I think you find it interesting with all these stories of these giants. It doesn't matter where they settled, they died at the hands of men. They were brutally wiped out. No matter where they ran in the earth, they could not escape their inevitable fate. They were murdered, they were killed, and they were dealt with as a problem by no matter what culture came across them. They were slaughtered one way or the other. There's an interesting, fascinating story for the Eskimo people, the Inuit people in the Northern Americas within Canada. They have this story of these giants called the Tunit tribe, and the Tunits were said to be, you know, very tall, human-like beings. You don't really get a description of what they looked like, just that they were incredibly tall and incredibly powerful. They could literally sprint at like 50 miles an hour. They could literally lift a seal above their head, no problem, you know what I mean, and just sling it over the shoulder and walk away. They were a swift, brutal, fast, just giant people in the north, and these called the Tunits. And the story is that ice giants, whenever the ice is solid enough, they come from the center of the earth across the ice plane, and they mate with human women. And then once the ice starts to melt, they go back. Okay, and that's the story, the myth of how the Tunit people came to be, and that's where the Tunit come from. I think that's more of an echo to an antediluvian time. I think what those people are describing is something they don't witness anymore, obviously, but they're describing a time where beings came from the north, angelic giant beings,
mated with human women and created the offspring Nephilim, which they called the Tunit. That's just their allegorical way of describing it. They came when the ice was hard enough, but really they probably just came from the north, as in, maybe you could argue the center of the earth if you want to go into the whole, the shape of the earth situation, or, where the mountain in the middle and everything, and how maybe that's where the Garden of Eden was. People, no, I'm not getting into that exactly. But I think you could easily describe the north as coming from the sky as well, like angels descending from the sky. But irregardless, their creation myth for these Tunit people is very similar to what's described in the Bible, and frost giants, I think, is just their way of saying elemental angels of some way, some bizarre element hybrid with some kind of vaguely human shape. Mm-hmm. But these Tunit people, what's interesting about these, they're never described as having any power. They're only ever described as being terrified of people and fleeing whenever they had incursions with them. So what I think we're actually talking about here, this is my theory, is that these are remnants of the Nephilim that were wiped out in the Middle East, in the lands of Canaan, that literally fled as far north as they possibly could and attempted to use the cold climate as a barrier to stop humans from getting to them, basically. But they've disappeared now, and it turns out the story is that the Inuits did clash with them a lot and killed them because they were encroaching on their hunting grounds. And that's kind of the last of the Nephilim in the north. But I thought that the interesting descriptor was they were scared of humans, which is bizarre for Nephilim that were understood from the antediluvian past. So I think these are a very recent tribe that very recently got wiped out. And I think they were terrified of their inevitable fate. And whatever humans attempted to get near them, they fled, basically. They didn't fight because they knew if we fight, we die. We don't win against humans anymore. I think that's kind of what happened to them. So that's one story. Maybe you haven't heard that one, but that's something I thought.
That's a good story. Yeah.
Puzzle.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. It's similar to, in some ways, to the, I believe it's Apache or the Navajo. They had their own creation story that there was a man with the white beard on the disc and that created the earth. And later a serpent came and taught the people sorceries and magic and sacrifice. And then the star gods came and took their women and mated with them and created the giants. It's almost the same story. And then it got so bad that I think they call the creator the father God or something like that. And that he brought a flood.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, literally, I think 16 pages of my book. It's just breaking down flood myths all around the earth because it's undeniable.
It is.
That happened. But what's interesting about these flood myths is they're all a survival story of some kind. And some of them are almost identical to Noah's story. So perhaps they are just a retelling of the same story, but obviously because of what happened to the Tower of Babel, they all have their own way of describing it. It's a shared cultural knowledge about what happened to Noah. Then some of them are a story that is extremely similar to Noah, but it's talking about somebody else surviving in a different way. So they didn't necessarily have the animals. The boat was a different shape, or it wasn't necessarily a boat, but it was like a huge tree that fell over that they managed to rest on, or they hid themselves in a giant vessel like a water gourd or something like that. And the survivor in these other parallel stories to Noah are usually kings or magic people who can survive for a long time without water or food or something like that. So I think that a lot of these parallel stories are Nephilim survival myths. And these people aren't people that are surviving, but they're actually corrupted people who are members of that whole all flesh is corrupted crew, that was described in the end. And I do think by nature of their corruption, they did have the abilities, kind of superpowers, shall we say, to ride out a flood. I think a lot of people mixed themselves with fish, for example, so had gills so they could swim and breathe underwater for long periods of time.
Yeah, Dagon.
Yeah, exactly. The Dagon fish gods that suddenly rise out of the sea and start preaching their philosophies again, after the flood to these primitive cultures that are spread out everywhere, So some of the stories as well, which are quite interesting, are just literally showed by sheer dumb luck, people survived by getting to the peak of a really tall mountain just in time and managing to ride it out long enough for the waters to go back down, just by the skin of their teeth, they barely survived, basically.
Right.
And there's a fascinating story for the Canary people of Panama. Is it Panama? I may be getting that wrong, but it's definitely the northern region of Southern America. But the Canary people there, they have this mythos of where they came from as a people, and they describe that there was a huge flood in which only 2 brothers survived, and they survived by climbing to the peak of this great mountain, which is in the region. They have a specific name for this mountain. And then when the waters subsided, everyone they knew was dead. So what they did, though, they kind of hung out in a cave in this mountain, and they found that food was being left there by something. So they kept eating this food and coming back every day and finding more there. Then eventually, in the valley, once all the water receded, 2 parrot-like beings, so the macaw, the parrot as we know it, descend from the skies, and the men see that these are 2 beautiful-looking women mixed with bird. They look like macaw parrot women, basically. Wow. And the whole story of how those people came to be is that those men raped those women and populated the region with them. So we have a Nephilim incursion story there again, basically, by these Canary people's creation myth. After a flood, these 2 men mated with human hybrids who possibly survived the flood by flying, basically, by the superpowers they'd gained through their own genetic manipulation, and then continued to spread that corruption again through the seed, Mm-hmm. So there's all these stories of floods and Nephilim surviving. And again, when I say the Nephilim, it's a broad term. People think Nephilim is simply just the giants that were created by the fallen angels mating with women. But I also put under that umbrella, because it's a big umbrella, the genetic hybrids as well, which were humans who mixed themselves with animals. I would say they were also corrupted just as much as the Nephilim were. The beings that should not have existed do not have the ability to hold the Holy Spirit as God intended. They are abominations, basically, through and through. And I would put them under the category of Nephilim, though I do think they're described in Enoch as Nephil and Elio. So the Nephilim themselves produced offspring, which are maybe like these strange animal-human hybrids as well. And then those things, humans created what are known as Elio, I think, which is the same as what we're describing here as these half-animal, half-human hybrids. All corrupt flesh, all a good reason to send a flood and do a hard reset, but the influence has never ended. And we must stress that we haven't made this point yet, but the disembodied spirits of these corrupted beings are the demons now. That's what demons are. That's where they come from. They're not angels, like a lot of people misunderstand demons to be. They are the spirits of these entities who no longer have a compatible soul, shall we say, to leave the earth. They're stuck here on the other side of the matrix of this reality, on earth with us, invisible in a sense. And that, as we'll get into, that's the whole DMT phenomena of meeting these entities on the other side. People like to think they're in touch with these divine, wonderful, archetypical symbols of the human collective consciousness that wants to teach them some wise wisdom or something about, how to live in the world peacefully or whatever, whatever nonsense. But the truth is, they're not going anywhere special. They're just going to a place in which people don't have bodies, basically. So it's here on Earth, and you can perceive it with your own eyes if you take enough drugs, but you're not going anywhere else. You're actually right here on Earth in the exact same place as you always were. And all the drug does is just give you the ability to see it. And I like to describe it as the warp and the woof decision. So if you have a carpet, let's say, a beautiful carpet with the most amazing pattern on top, and that's the present side. That's the side everyone sees, If you turn that carpet over, and this is a proper hand-woven carpet, you'll find it's a mess. You'll find all the strings connecting colors to different points, and you'll find the maker's design behind the beautiful pattern that's presented on the other side. It's the other side of the rug. It's still the same rug. All you're doing is just looking at the other side, the makings of it, the internal matrix, the code, the designing principles behind the thing that should be experienced, which is the world we live in with a body. These entities don't have a body anymore. They're trapped in this place, this other side of the rug. and they can't experience things like taste, touch, feel. And these things were worshipped as gods. They were kings who could, satisfy any urge they had at any given moment. And that's all gone from them now. So, that's what demons are. That's why they lust after your body. That's why they want cultures all around the world to dress like them in order to let them in so they can experience things again. That's all demons really want. They don't have much else going on in their mind. Jesus described it clearly. I think it was in Mark, that when an unclean spirit leaves a man, it goes through dry places, and it hungers and thirsts, but it can't satisfy these things. And then obviously if you aren't filled with the Holy Spirit, it will come back and fill that void again, with more of its mates. It gets even worse. It gets 10 times as worse. I think a lot of people don't understand the origin of demons. They don't understand the links to the Nephilim. And as a result, we have all these cultures around the world who are fully deceived, and are regularly bringing them back into this world through their rituals and folk traditions. I get a lot of people argue with me that it's kind of like I'm being myopic. How can you say all of these religions are false and yours is right type of attitude? Yes, all these, and they give me these arguments like, no, these people are peaceful cultures who don't worship demons. They venerate these other gods type of thing, and they have whatever excuse they have. And I try and make it clear to them, look, I understand how all encompassing and myopic it might sound to you that I'm saying this, but if you consider the history of the matter, it makes sense. Okay. And no one's culture is special in that respect. You know what I mean? Everyone's just doing the same thing with a different style. And it all has its roots in this veneration of the Nephilim. So let's I'd like to move this on a little bit, and let's just get to the clown matter.
Well, just really quick on that religion stuff. A lot of people today are into the ancient alien, Anunnaki, forbidden knowledge stuff, right? Okay. Well, for the listeners out there, here's a little, I'll summarize who the Anunnaki were.
Sure.
In David Roll's book, he discusses in the beginning, these were the 7 sages plus Satan. There's 8. There were 8 in the table of kings in the Sumerians before there was a table of 10 kings. You go into Egypt, these 7 sages were called the Shebtu. In other cultures, they're called the Shebeti. And the Hindu belief systems, they have the same gods, the same sages. All these 7 sages, Anunnaki, Shebtu, Shebeti, whatever you want to call these things throughout, there's different vernacular for different countries. These were rebellious watchers that taught humanity the construction of the megalithic structures and knowledge of geometry and all sorts of other knowledge of government and so forth for civilizations. This is not my opinion. This is in books that scholarly researchers have investigated throughout history, including Gary Wayne, Derek Gilbert. There's so many others out there that, you just have to look. You have to research yourself. And many of these are the religions of today. For example, the Hindus, Shiva or whatever you want to call this entity, reincarnated as Buddha. It goes on and on and on. It's all a reincarnation theory. But when you read in the Bible, there's no reincarnation. You die, you get a new body when Christ comes back, and that's it. There's no reincarnation in the Hebrew text. And that's the difference. If you want to believe that the Anunnaki are the gods that created us, okay, well, let's talk about that. The Anunnaki supposedly did come and they created a slave race. Okay, that's similar to Genesis 6, when the sons of God mated with the women of the earth. They created a new race. We don't know that the Anunnaki did that. Oh, it sounds like they did the same thing as Genesis 6. Maybe they created this slave race, which they call the Blackheads. Mm-hmm. And you can find that in Gary Wayne's book, A Slave Race.
Absolutely.
And you go forward and you understand that the Igigi, the other peoples, didn't like working with the Anunnaki. So that's why the Anunnaki created the slave race, probably through breeding, through, human women or if they were able to shapeshift through men, I mean, they could turn themselves into women. We don't know, but but what we do have some history on it that we can put the pieces of the puzzle together to almost see an exact clear picture. So be careful out the listeners when you're looking into, I know it's a fascinating topic. It's fascinating to me. Antiquities, understanding Atlantis. That's another rabbit hole that talks about the 10 kings, Poseidon mating with the human woman. You get the same 10 kings in Revelation at the end. It goes on and on and on and on. But yeah, research it. Be careful with this Anunnaki thing. Yes, in my opinion, they are real gods. These are small g gods. These are the watchers that rebelled. They had a head of a man, a head of a bull, a head of an eagle. What does that describe to you in the Bible? Cherubim. How do we know these Sumerians weren't looking at these watchers walking on the earth and started worshiping them? How do we know these certain cherubim didn't rebel? We don't know, but in my opinion, I think that these ancient Sumerians they depicted what they saw on the earth, and they made images of them. And another thing, just really quick, and I'll let you get back into the clowns. The whole thing about the Sumerian text, the cuneiforms, predate the Bible. Anything written in the Bible. That's true. Okay. But however, when you look at native cultures, even the Aborigines of Australia, they have rock art going back 45,000 years ago. You have the Native Americans going probably 20,000 years ago. These are called oral traditions or written traditions. The same thing with the ancient Hebrews. Do people really believe that Moses was there watching God create the heavens and the earth and writing it down while God was doing this? No, this was given to him much later after the event. So just because something is written before something else doesn't make it older. This goes back to oral tradition. So that's it for me. Let's get back onto the clowns.
No, you hit a lot of key points there, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think within a secular world, people would much readily believe aliens before they believe angels, unfortunately. And there is an agenda out there to make people think, it is all just out of space, right. Extraterrestrials, coming from space, and whether you want to go down the fear routes that the Anunnaki are going to return when Planet X comes back into our system in order to mine us for more resources, or you want to go down the more benevolent route that the Palladians are going to come back with the Galactic Federation to teach mankind how to ascend their consciousness to be like them or something. I don't know. This whole push to make fallen angels and their demons seem like angels is a huge agenda that's still at play today. And I don't think we've heard the last of it. We have not seen that agenda come to full fruition yet. The only message I can add to what you just said, obviously, is if anything to do with aliens does happen, do not be deceived. It's not aliens. They're not extraterrestrial. They are extremely terrestrial. They have always been here, and they have an agenda to make you believe that They are something but what they are. I think aliens were just in the news recently, weren't they? Some footage of an alien in the back garden of someone or something like that. They're always pushing it to the consciousness, the forefront of people's minds.
Right.
There's always a UFO sighting to report news on. There's always something to do with aliens. The government always has to say something to do with aliens once a year. Something weird and sus, like we're releasing these documents from the 60s about what happened at Roswell and all this type of stuff. They'll always do something to make sure the narrative of aliens does not die out. And there's good reason for that. They're going to put on a show for us at some point. And do not believe a word of it. There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
It's the same game with a different name.
Absolutely.
Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about the clowns. Let's break down, first of all, the history of a clown in the West. Okay. To give you some context of why it's important to understand why we have clowns today in the West and where the outfit comes from, just who inspired all that and why it looks the way it does. And then we can link it back to the Nephilim at the end. So the history of the clown is actually relatively new in a Western context. So we're talking about the circus clown with the red hair and the white paint and the silly multicolored clothing, and the slapstick act and the honking and the juggling and all that sort of stuff. That's quite new, relatively speaking. It's about 200 years old, as we know it, but its origins go back maybe 200 to 300 years before that. So what we have are these folk traditional cultures, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, within Europe, they have the wild man tradition and the traditions of the wild hunt. And what we had in the medieval period was these people were claiming to have apparitions or experiences with these roving gangs of demons that would move through the forest and through villages, just destroying the place and killing people, led by a giant called Harlequin. And this giant had a big club, was hairy and huge with red hair, white skin, the whole shebang.
Wow.
And he had this legion of demons that would follow him. And this was known as the Wild Hunt, or the wild something or other. This is all throughout Germany, France, basically all throughout Europe. They had this wild man tradition. And they describe these wild men as having their own tribes within and having incursions and fights with humans here and there. There's a famous Swiss tapestry that shows the wild men attacking the Moors, in fact, if you haven't seen that one. And they're basically these giant hairy men and women. There was females as well. So these entities had haunted medieval Europe, maybe physically and literally, if it isn't allegorical of a time even further in the past. I don't know how long it took for all the Nephilim to be wiped out, or if they're even still here, but some people would argue they are still here, So maybe we do have these incursions maybe 1,000 years ago still of wild men and giants and monsters being a pain to human beings, just like the red-haired white-skinned giants for the Paiute tribes in America who had to smoke them out of a cave and kill them, that seems like a very modern story, even though it's an oral tradition. I think it happened more recent than we like to think it does. So something happened in this weird early time of history, in this medieval period. People, equate it to the Dark Ages as well, where they were having experiences with these hairy men, these wild men, which were basically just Nephilim. That's summarize it quite quickly. That's what they were, remnants of Nephilim still doing their thing. But people made folk traditions out of them. And they would dress like the wild man. And the idea was you dress like demons to confuse the demons, to scare the demons away so they don't destroy your village. And every, pagan tradition within these cultures, these folk traditions had this practice of dressing like the wild man. And in Bulgaria, they call it the kukri today, and it's still practiced today. It's the same ritual that was practiced hundreds of years ago. It never changed orally. And it's kind of a glimpse into the ancient past when you look at these traditions. They've kind of been Christianized quite heavily through the Catholic spread of the time, and they've kind of been introduced into Lent traditions of carnival. And you see a lot of these characters represented in the carnival traditions now before the fast of the 40 days, I think Shrove Tuesday and Ash Wednesday is kind of a part of the tradition now as well. As most things did get pagan traditions did kind of get amalgamated into this Christianized-ish tradition, which I have my own thoughts and disagreements about, but it happened nonetheless. So from this tradition of the wild man is described as having colorful hair and many tufts of hair and being wild in his looks and nature. It's who the Green Man is based on. That's another popular mythos character. So the Green Man is a good example. A lot of people equate it as well to Dionysus being a similar character to the wild man. He was known for having his horde of merry revelers who would follow him from town to town, causing chaos and enticing more people to join his horde with drugs and hypnotism, So it's very similar to this Harlequin character. But the Harlequin character is more demonic and dark than frivolous and fun, But it's the same archetypical idea, isn't it? This tradition goes down and people start dressing like this wild man in their own folk traditions. And coming out the back end of this medieval period where these traditions are quite popular in Europe and these oral traditions are carried on and these festivals happen, you find that a character was made within the Commedia dell'arte movements within France and Italy. And there'd be these traveling bands of performers who would perform these shows where they have these stock characters. And the Harlequin character, who's named after Harlequins, would be one of the main lead characters within the show. And he would have his stick, which Harlequin would carry, which would become the slapstick in later iterations. And he would dress in patchwork He'd have white skin, but have patchwork multicolors sewn into his costume. And this was the proto Harlequin character. Okay. So this was, let's say, the 1600s coming out of the 1500s. This was happening. And this stock character became the lead within the shows. And it slowly developed into, over like a couple of hundred years, into British shows known as Harlequin arts, where it would become pantomimes involving these stock characters with Harlequin as the lead. So as Harlequin progressed throughout the years, it was this character who would wear this ghoulish mask with one horn. A lot of people would make it reference to Cain being having this mark on his head, this forehead. Right. And Cain himself was described as being incredibly hairy, and being a giant in many respects. I think he obviously was killed being mistaken for a beast within the biblical canonical texts. So a lot of people relate this to Cain, the character of the wild man, as well. So it's all rooted in biblical theology, demonic encounters haunting the memories of Europe. And eventually this character called Harlequin was created within shows. Now, Harlequin was a prototypical clown character. He was a fool character. He was there he kind of had magical abilities. He could change the scene by simply slapping his stick. He had this magic wand that could change reality on the stage, and he would have a love interest, which would be the Columbine, which would be the daughter of the industrial leader of the age, whatever that character was, the evil leader. And he would chase after the daughter. But he would also have a clown character, kind of a proto-clown character. It began with P. Is it Punchinelli? I think it was known as then. Who would kind of be the foil. He would be the master whose daughter he was after would have the slave character, and this would be the clown. And the clown would kind of hinder Harlequin's attempts to get with the woman, and there was this funny back and forth. So it was all done in jest and humor, but the Harlequin character itself is deeply rooted in Nephilim. It's a Nephilim representation, specifically more the European wild man. Right. Anyway, this character develops over time and it gets softer. It becomes more of a doting idiot, not the cunning, fast-witted magician that it used to be. It kind of becomes this doting fool who's constantly trying to get this woman, this Columbine, and he gets more flowery and innocent as time goes on. His suit gets a bit more fancy, gets more the Harlequin diamond pattern, multicolored pattern. His hat gets a little bit more aristocracy, type, like he's more of a fancy ponce rather than a brutish demon, which he originally was, And something happened. His character kind of got replaced slowly, highly popularized during the Harlequinades of England. So the tradition had come over to England, and England kind of gave their own spin to it, and they focused in on the clown character. Because the clown character initially, was just a servant in servant rags and didn't really dress as we know a clown's are dressed today. It was mainly all in white with black pom-poms mainly, wearing very loose-fitting servant's garb of the day, traditional servant's garb. But the back and forth between Harlequin and the clown was so popular, and the clown began to become the more popular character as the centuries went by. So it kind of overshadowed the Harlequin, and the Harlequin took a back seat. And the clown started to take on the characteristics Harlequin originally had, coming out of the medieval period. And it became this larger-than-life, wacky, ghoulish creature who had power, to dominate the scene, basically. So the clown needed a costume change, basically. And this is what happened in the 1800s. So the most famous clown in the Western world is Joey Grimaldi. He's the person people think of when you think of who invented the modern clown. Type it in, who invented the clown, and the mainstream answer will be Joey Grimaldi invented the clown as we know it today. But that's not true. That's a misunderstanding of what actually happened there. Joey Grimaldi was a brilliant acrobat who performed in multiple Harlequinades of the age, by nature of his father, who was also an incredibly influential acrobat and dentist of the age as well. And he served many wealthy, rich aristocrats of the time. He was well ingrained in the culture, a very wealthy man, a very well-connected man. And his child, Joey Grimaldi, followed in his footsteps to be a performer, basically. And he was doing these backflips and acting in this insanely energetic way on stage that just everyone loved him. And he was then hired to be a part of a Harlequinade and play the role of clown within a brand new production which was put on by a Freemason called Charles Dibdin, who had just purchased a theatre on Drury Lane during that time. Drury Lane in London had a lot of this influence going on at the time to do with performance and theatre. It was the place to be. It's where all the artists were gathering. And now you find during that time, there's a sect of Freemasonry known as the Royal Antediluvian Order of the Buffaloes that was actually had its meetings on Drury Lane, in the same place the clown was doing its performances for the first time. And this Freemasonic group was originally made up of stagehands and actors. But it got to the point, it was called the City of Lushington originally. And it was kind of like a joke a parody on the way politics worked within the region. And they'd have their own versions of a mayor and a plaintiff and a judge, within their rituals. But it got to the point where it got so big in this tiny space that they had to kick out all the stagehands and only actors were allowed in. So the stagehands, the people who put on the shows, designed the shows, did the costumes, made their own secret society known as the Antediluvian Royal Order of the Buffalo. So they called themselves the Buffs. They say it was named after a popular song of the time, but I don't know. The reasoning to add antediluvian in there is just a strange one to begin with. That requires more research. But they have the typical advertisement today. We're a philanthropic organization that raises money for kids and charity. That's all they are today, apparently. But they had their own lodges, and one of them was even named the Joey Grimaldi Lodge in the north in Newcastle. So this area where all this was happening, where this show was being put on with Joey Grimaldi being the star clown in this new show put on by a Freemason called Charles Dibdin. Now, Charles Dibdin wasn't a member of this antediluvian. He was more ingrained in the more ancient rite of Scottish Freemasonry. He was much higher up than this newly formed secret society, which today is just another wing of Freemasonry. It got amalgamated into it as time went on. But during the time, this guy called Charles Dibdin was a famous playwright, a musical writer, a musician of the age within his circles. He had kind of like a cult following of the time. He wrote a lot of nautical themed maritime songs, which were quite popular with British sailors, and he bought his own theatre in Drury Lane and he put on this show, this Harlequinade, and so he was intimately close with the world's greatest clown, Joey Grimaldi. He must have known his father or something to let him hire him. I don't know what made him choose him. But he decided for this show, we're going to do a costume change. And Charles Dibdin introduced the image of a clown we know today. And that's where that was invented. It was invented by a Freemason for no apparent reason. It was just done one day. Okay. Now, I believe personally, and we'll get into this, that the Freemasons, who are nothing but a continuation of the serpent cults of the antediluvian age. Mm-hmm. They are the keepers of the seven sacred sciences, corrupted to have their own power, which Gary Wayne talks about. Right. The practices haven't changed since then. It's just occulted and hidden from the profane masses. And they worship the Nephilim. That's what they do. They work hand in hand with the demonic forces on the other side to further the agenda of the spurious fallen angels who they have sided with, Lucifer. Okay, that's what Freemasonry is. It's physical foot soldiers to help the spiritual agenda, basically. And I believe what they did there, what Charles Dibdin knowingly did, was hijack the character of a clown and create an image for people to venerate and watch and worship within rituals that we call a clown. And they got this individual, Joey Grimaldi, this very popular performer of the day, to wear this costume and ingrain it as the staple costume for the next 1,000 years that performers of clowns must wear. There's no better costume to represent a clown than the one he invented for Joey Grimaldi to wear. And that's what happened. And Joey Grimaldi is now the king of clowns. He's the first ever clown as we know it, with all the multicolors, the neck ruffle, the crazy wild colored hair, the white face paint with all the multicolored patterns all over the face, the silly buffoonery involved with it and all, the The archetypical image of a Western clown was invented in exactly 1800 by Charles Dibdin, a Freemason. And Charles Dibdin, I did some research, and you can find he was a member of the Leicester Lodge. And 100 years after his death, someone did a piece on him within the lodge and wrote it down in the minutes for the meeting. And they basically reminisced about his life and work and how he contributed to the craft, you know. And it goes on to talk about his maritime music and the music he made. It doesn't really dwell on the clown stuff, but what it does mention is that he wrote a harlequinade called Harlequin Freemason. And it was literally a harlequinade musical written with a full script, which was put into this book, which is just dedicated to venerating and telling the story of Freemasonry from the antediluvian age all the way to the modern age.
That's wild.
And that's what he's been famed for. So this person knew what he was doing when he decided to make a costume change. I believe he knows what Nephilim looked like. I believe he understands the practices of dressing like something evokes the spirit. And I think he has purposefully popularized the clown into modern culture, hidden it under layers of nuance and obviously symbolism, so people won't clock on to what's really happening. Made it a full character so people are enamored by it and won't think anything of it. But what it really represents is their gods that they worship, which are the Nephilim of the past. The Nephilim had snake-like, avian-like, amphibian-like features inherited from their fallen angel parents. So what the Nephilim looked like, essentially, and these are the descriptions we have as well from encounters like those in America in Lovelock Cave, or if you want to go for a more modern interpretation of the Giants of Kandahar, which was met by the military in Afghanistan. It's pale white skin, wild red hair. And that is the archetypical image. That's the base of a clown. Now let's add more to the clown, shall we?
Sure.
A clown also usually has a large neck ruffle around its neck in some way. That's a reptilian feature known as a frill. If you look at reptiles and type in reptilian frill, lizard frill, you'll find it's quite common, especially in Australia. I think the neck ruffle is a reptilian feature manifested into the archetypical image of a clown Charles Dibdin incorporated. Other than that, multicolored clothing and polka dot patterns with pinstripes. That is a direct reference to the patterns on the skin of the Nephilim. These are serpentine hybrid humans. If you look at a snake, if you look at an iguana as a good example, if you even look at an octopus or any of the aquatic life out there, if you even look at an insect, some of the patterns on a butterfly's wings, nature has an incredibly psychedelic color palette. And the Nephilim were serpentine human hybrids. They gained their features from seraphim serpent angels, the dragons, as they otherwise were known. They were humans with serpent-like features. They not only had white skin, but predominantly on the face, but they also had psychedelic patterned skin, not dissimilar from a snake or a lizard. I think the polka dots, the stripes incorporated into the costume of a clown represents the serpentine patterns of the Nephilim that were on their skin, inherited from their parents. And it doesn't just stop there. They also had avian features. An angel has wings. It can fly. The most archetypical image of an angel is with feathered wings. I think if we look at the feathered serpent of Quetzalcoatl, which is another famed one within the Northern Americas and the South Americas, they all have these plume serpents, these feathered serpents, the dragons of China, another good example, these wispy, airy dragons with crazy ribbons flying off them of all directions. I think they were avian features. And if you look at birds, they're pretty colorful and psychedelic too. I think a lot of these Nephilim had feather-like features, multicolored features inherited from their parents. So that's what the multicolored psychedelic clothing is all about on a clown. That's what the white skin represents as well. It's just seen to be a general side effect of merging yourself with the divine, is that your skin becomes like a weird porcelain white color. It appears not white like a Caucasian white. I'm talking bleach white here. Okay, it's bizarre, like a clown makeup would wear. Now, clown's makeup alone, if you look at the face, they often put a slit down the eye. That's a reptilian eye that they're trying to manifest there. If it isn't a slit down the eye or a cross representing that this is a deceased or dead entity, they also blush blue on their eyelids. And they also create an incredibly high brow ridge with black makeup. So the high brow ridge represents an elongated skull. They're trying to create a caricatured representation of a longer looking forehead. And we look at the skulls found all around the earth. These Nephilim had very long foreheads,
right.
long and thin features, not dissimilar from a snake or a serpent. So that's what the high brow ridge is for. But you often find they paint the high brow ridge, quite common, with blue paint. And when the clown closes his eyes, it looks like he has giant blue eyes. Gary Wayne's described this in his book as well, but they were known as the glowing ones, the Nephilim. They had a glowing blue eyes. And that's what the clown makeup is trying to venerate and show. And the high brow ridge paint line, not only does it show a very tall forehead, but it's also the top of the eye. And that's what they're also trying to show there subtly within the symbolism. So we're talking about reptiles. A snake can dislocate its jaw to open its mouth incredibly wide, and it can eat its prey doing so. The Nephilim had serpentine-like features. They had faces and visages inherited from their parents, who were described in, let's say, the Book of Amran, which is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, as having faces like vipers, like adders, like serpents. I think the Nephilim had very wide jaws, very wide mouths, just like a serpent. And that's why the clown has the paint to make the mouth look incredibly wide, like a huge smile. See, the Nephilim weren't smiling all the time. It just looks like that from the front because of the nature of the shape of their face, basically. And that's what the clown makeup is representing the wide smile for. I think the red around the mouth and the red nose, it could be indicative of a few things. These beings drank the blood. That's what they were famous for. They were cannibalistic, not only against each other, but they also ate humans. So it's not quite cannibalism, eating a human, but it's still brutal and horrible. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a toddler eating spaghetti bolognese before, but it can get pretty messy. And they get these big red horrible smears around the mouth and all over their nose as well. I think that's a subtle nod to. But I have also found evidence and references in other cultures that they may actually have had long red noses as well. That may have been a literal feature as well as a metaphorical one within the clown symbolism of the face paint. Obviously, the wild red hair, you often find they have a gap in the middle to make the skull look a lot longer as well. So it's all there symbolically. And they got the neck ruffle. Now let's get more metaphorical. Clowns are synonymous to be worn with stilts, which again makes them look like a giant. They're synonymous for wearing big, silly shoes that make their feet look enormous, like a giant would have had, or big, large gloves to make their hands look larger than life, like a giant would have. Almost in a similar fashion, they would do the inverse of that and make them have very small things like a tiny umbrella or a tiny hat. Again, to make themselves look enormous in comparison to the silly little thing they're wearing that a normal human would wear, because they're supposed to represent giants symbolically. A mime is a good example of this. It's a kind of an offshoot of the clown, but it's still similar in its own nature. I think the mime is very indicative of what these things look like now in their disembodied form. So they are trapped within a matrix. So you often see a mime doing the trapped in a cube thing. They can't communicate with us anymore because they don't have a body. So the mime is mute as well. They still have the white face and the ghost features, but they now have the black and white pattern instead.
Yeah, the black and white.
Yeah, so the black and white pattern is a huge symbol used not only to represent clowns and mimes in the disembodied form, but you'll even find in traditional cultures around the world, they use the black and white to depict their own entities and clown beings. So the Pueblo tribes, again, the Heyo Kachina, they look identical, yet they're separated by a lot of land, and they're trying to represent the same entity that they see on the other side through their own rituals. And they're known for taking chemicals to see the beings on the other side. And how do they choose to depict them but as black and white fractaled beings? So that can't be ignored. And I do believe, as these Freemasons are traveling men who do look at other cultures around the world that venerate their own gods, I think they've picked up features from these traditional folk traditions and merged them into their clown image, which is what Charles Dibdin did, So we'll find similar patterns in all these folk traditions, which you could cherry pick and create a clown with in the West quite easily. Now, bear this in mind, like I said, you have the stilts, the tiny car to make them seem like they're giants as well. Many of them coming out of the tiny car could just be symbolic of, their legion. There are many, and they don't conform to the rules of reality or physics as we know it to be. It goes on. The symbols just keep going with the clown. The clown is a caricature. That's the best way to describe it. It's an over-the-top symbolic representation of the Nephilim. And the clever thing of the clown is it was created in the West for us not to know that that's what it was. So during this period of the 18th century, the clown image became far more popular, and things called circuses started to be invented, basically. And you'll find some of the earliest circuses were created by Freemasons. The Barnum and Bailey and the Ringling Bros, all Freemasons. And they put on the first circuses as we know them, which were fashioned after these equestrian horse shows from Britain. So what they brought to America were these traveling tents, which had these circuses put on full of clowns with the ringmaster at the top. Now, the hat man, ringmaster, who is the orchestrator of the circus, is modeled after the Grandmaster of Freemasonry, who is the only one allowed to wear a top hat. The hat man, ringmaster of the circus, is a parody of the orchestrator of the demons. It's also kind of like a Solomon analog, because Solomon was the master of demons, and they claim to have a lineage to the Temple of Solomon and all that kind of nonsense, even though they're just kind of corrupting their own history. So you find the ringleader, or the hat man, is symbolic of the leader of the demons, and he orchestrates the clowns, or the demons, within this symbolic show, which is put on what we call a circus. And what it basically does is get the public in different towns as it travels to be involved in their invocation rituals on a huge, grand scale. And I have a quote in my book, which I don't have to hand now, which goes into this, but basically there was a huge performance put on by the Ringling Bros, which was King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
Interesting.
Yeah, during this early time. And it was basically described as everything was created by Freemasons. Everything, including the backdrops and the costumes. It was all done by Freemason affiliated companies. And it goes into list all of them. The company that made all the costumes doesn't exist anymore, actually, but you can go find its website and its stock catalogs. And it's where Freemasons ordered their own stuff from, like their aprons and medals and things like that. And costumes for their rituals, basically, are ordered through this company. And this company made all the costumes for this King Solomon and Queen of Sheba show, which toured the earth. And it was described as it was a way in which Freemasons could see their rituals played out on a grand scale that they weren't used to in their lodges. Wow. And it was basically, the circus was invented strictly for Freemasons to see their gods being venerated on a huge, grand scale. That's what it was for. It's not for our entertainment.
Right.
It's a huge ritual that they got people to partake in, Mm-hmm. And this is the ignorance that comes with it, Every other culture knows what they do when they dress that way. They're evoking the spirits to be possessed by them. Do we know that that's what we're doing when we wear the clown costume? We don't. But the practice is the same. The results are the same. It's playing with fire, And I think, again, if you want to go way back to the start of this conversation, it's the teaching the mankind the art of makeup and its power and what it can truly do. It goes back to these type of performances that, we have trivialized, and we consider something fun and simple and for the kids, in the West. But that's not truly the origins of this. The clown itself, if you don't even want to go off the whole Freemason angle, the clown is based on the Harlequin, which is literally based on the devil and demons. Its roots are clear, it's not hidden if they do a little bit of digging. And if we go to the modern age, the circus is kind of dying out, but clowning isn't. And dressing like a clown is certainly having a new revival or renaissance. Just this year, the fashion industry has released clown core and the clown aesthetic, and they have pushed it on the runways. Once it gets on the runways, even though it's extreme on the runway, the clown aesthetic, you will find the fashion sense will start to wean its way down into the public through the outlets in a more toned down way. You'll find if you type into TikTok, clown core, it's some kind of strange fashion trend that's going on, mainly among young women who are dressing like a clown on a day-to-day basis. And when you consider what my research has entailed and what it truly means to dress in a certain way like that, something dark is going on with modern reality. And, you find the rise of the evil clown is everywhere right now in film and media as well. We obviously over the past decade, we had the film called Clown come out, which was about a Scandinavian demon called a cloyne whose skin looks like what we call a clown. Mm-hmm. And a man unwittingly puts on the demon's skin, gets possessed by the demon. And the only way he can take the costume off and be free is to eat 5 children. Just a random film that came out in 2014.
Wow.
And then It came out, and It Part 2 came out, the remake, you know. It's just something about clowns. Then we had the sightings in 2016 randomly, which is what sparked all this for me, you know. It's all by design. And the kind of, it's like the hidden in plain sight thing, which these people love to do.
That's a good point.
It's what they've always done, you know.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, you know, if you look into Freemason even more, we have what's called the Shriners. The Shriners are infamous for dressing like clowns. They have their own clown sects in every single place where the shrine is. And the Shriner clowns are known for going to hospitals to see dying children, you know, in order to, you know, cheer them up or whatever. And they claim it's all a philanthropic effort to cheer up the kids, you know. But that's not the case. All the studies have shown that children are terrified of clowns. Children do not like clowns. No study has ever shown that children like clowns. Okay, maybe 1 in 100 does, but they're the outlier. You know, they're not the norm. They're not the tradition of what the research is indicating. Okay,
Right.
Children are instinctively terrified of clowns. They just are. Okay, yet these dying children in hospital, in their last days, get traumatized by somebody coming dressed as a Nephilim demon. You know, that they're terrified of. There's nothing philanthropic about the process. I'm sorry. Even right now, modernizing the news lately, they are pushing, literally, the articles coming out this week about it, therapy clowns, people dressing like clowns to go and help give therapy to people with depression or people with Alzheimer's and things like that. They're really pushing it, you know, in a weird way, a very creepy way. And Shriners, it's a step a level above Freemasonry, and they venerate the clown. They dress like the clown all the time. And when you realize that they worship demons and they're a part of the agenda, then what they're really doing is dressing like their gods openly. And they found a way to do it when nobody will even realize that's what they're doing. They love doing that. That's what they do. You know, they rub it in your face and laugh at you while they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you won't even know it. You won't even know what's going on because you don't know enough about history or the symbols to recognize a demon when you see one. You know, they're very sneaky. Then even a level above that, you have the Royal Order of the Jesters. And you can't just become a jester. You have to be invited. You have to be a high-level Freemason who has already become a high-level Shriner before you can even get invited to be a member of the Royal Order of the Jesters.
Right.
And I believe when you get to that level, things get sick. Okay? They're no longer clowning around. They are performing murder rituals, dark things, very dark things, with a smile. You know, these are the sickest jokers. They're like a Joker would in Batman, let's say. These are the jesters of the Royal Order. That's the kind of level of sick depravity they truly are. I believe people like that are agents of chaos in the world, you know, and it gets really messed up when you get to that level. And it's hard to find any information on them. They are the most occulted group like that exists out there. And there has been a scandal that was released about them maybe a few years ago about them getting involved with some weird sex stuff, but it's very quickly buried and you don't really know much about it or who the members were exactly. But it goes way darker than that. But the clown is deeply rooted in Freemasonry. It's venerated openly in the Shriners, even more occulted and weirdly by the Order of the Jesters. That's the clown. So I say it again, you know, the Nephilim look like clowns, but it's not just that. The title is slightly misleading. What I'm really trying to say is, and this is basically what the director of Killer Clowns from Outer Space said. You know, he was asked, why do they look like clowns? Why do the aliens look like clowns? And he said, no. Clowns look like them. And that's basically what my theory is. Clowns are purposefully made to look like the Nephilim.
That's crazy.
So there you go. That's it
crazy.
in a nutshell.
I think
summarized.
I think probably right now, this day and age, you're mentioning that they're selling clothing lines now. It's getting trendy now. I think the biggest deception would be people walking around with tattooed faces like clowns or painted like clowns, claiming to be deliverance ministers or exorcists. People seriously out there, you got to understand what I'm saying without saying it. Be careful with people that have, faces like a clown claiming to be delivering demons out of people. How can anyone who, in my opinion, I'm not being judgmental, but if I had a face of a clown and I repented that, I would do everything in my ability to get that removed and to become more Christ-like, because I know what that represents and what Paul just laid out here, even more so. But yeah, I think we're moving into an age where I think Paul is right. We're going to see more clown iconography in today's society. Who knows? We might even see clowns in churches just to, like Paul explained, to cheer the people up. I mean, some churches today celebrate, Halloween, so there's clowns in that too. And to each their own. For me personally, just touching on Halloween, I think it's how you approach it. I think if you're actually doing rituals, I think it's really dark. But for the most part, I don't participate in it. I'm older now. My kids are grown up. But yeah, just be careful what you do and what you surround yourself with and what you see out there, especially this whole trendy clown thing going on. Yeah, Paul, that's a good. I didn't know about the clothing line being, becoming trendy. You're right. I mean, it'll be colorful, and I'm sure a lot of the young crowd will like to wear that stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Like I said, it's ignorance abounds with this topic, with this idea, and I don't blame people for not knowing that. Who the hell would think this? Even I understand how crazy it sounds at first. It just doesn't take long to understand. All you need to do is listen to me rant on for an hour and a half and watch some of my videos, and it'll become pretty clear what's going on. And it's just another symbol that has been occulted for a long time, which has now come to light. All glory to God for revealing it to me. At the end of the day, I've only just pointed out what's there. And now many other people can clearly see the influence behind certain people. I mean, there's a protected class of people who are making waves throughout the world right now, who I'm probably not even allowed to mention. I like to call them the multicolored collective. But I know I made a video on that, and it's one of my only videos that instantly got demonetized and flagged. So it's still out there to watch, but I don't, and it's popular, but I don't get anything from it other than the truth getting out, really, which is fine. But instantly, without even a second thought, it was demonetized and shut down. But the multicolored collective, these are people who have demons in them. At the end of the day, they're influenced by demons. That's why they are so prideful and full of sin and lust, and depravity. And the demon who possesses them would love for the possessed to manifest features that represent them. And that's what you find. You find they get as colorful and psychedelic as they possibly can. They dye their hair a crazy color. They make their makeup to look like they are an insane clown. And they twist and turn expectations of societal norms at every turn. And they consider themselves the new norm. And if you go against it, you're a bigot full of hate, Mm-hmm. They are the biggest gaslighters in the world. They are the true clowns in look and spirit, but what they really are is Nephilim in look and spirit. They're demons, manifest reality, but I'm not allowed to say. Yeah. I'm not allowed to say exactly who that is. I'll let you figure out who I'm talking about, and there's many manifestations of how that can come through, but that is a very real variation on what I'm saying.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's people out there that, I'm not going to mention any names because, like you were saying, you get a strike, and that's okay, because I think it's more enticing for people to actually research and figure out, who may be the persons we're speaking about. But it's for anyone to, this all ties to the Masons. And I believe, isn't Nimrod their first Grandmaster?
Yes. Yeah, they attribute Nimrod as the first person, because this is after the flood. He built multiple cities and great ziggurats. He was the master. Not necessarily. He was one of the major masterminds behind building the Tower of Babel, wasn't he? Which was a huge architectural feat. He was one of the first people to rediscover the knowledge, which was occulted by Enoch and his sons before the flood came. He was the one who probably rediscovered it. I think he had a priest called Hermes who helped him interpret the hieroglyphs, which were on the pillars, which were created by Enoch's sons to preserve the knowledge of Freemasonry, basically, of the 7 sacred sciences. architecture being one of them,
Mm-hmm.
geometry being one of them. And yeah, they do equate Nimrod with being the first antediluvian Grandmaster, the first builder, the great builder, the great mason. Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. Nimrod, the good old Nimrod, right?
Well, yeah.
I wonder if that Nimrod name is just a title. It's not his real name.
Well, he goes by many names, I believe. I think people have been in the Bible. He's only kind of briefly mentioned, isn't he? I suppose in the canonical text. You get a lot more deeper information about him in the extra biblical apocryphal texts like Jubilees and Jasher. But I mean, it feels like, Rob Skeever did a lot of work on this, didn't he? That it seems like he was possibly an Antichrist figure, if not a good contender for the Antichrist, one of the best contenders for it. I think people have considered him that he is Gilgamesh. But again, I don't know. That you can only really speculate as much as you can on this one. But Nimrod was definitely, what I've wrote in my book about him is that he was one of the major players in making sure that the Nephilim could reestablish their kingdoms after the flood. He helped big time. Like he did everything he could to not only be like the Nephilim,
yep,
be great in stature and power and rulership like an Archon himself. He idolized who they were and what they did before the flood, and he did everything he could to try and be like them. Maybe he possibly did become one. Just speculation that he managed to change himself, But if not, he definitely had the help of giants to build that tower. So he dominated giants as well as worked with giants, He helped to rebuild and establish the kingdoms, which became the corrupt nations of Canaan. He helped the remnants of the giants. If they simply survived the flood, they all came to him, and he had a desire to rebel just as much as they did, and he helped them reestablish and build great cities to be kings and rulers once again. He was an extremely important player in the whole after the flood situation.
Right.
Absolutely.
And what's fascinating when you mentioned the black and white patterns of the clown imagery from the Native American, you see that in the movie Beetlejuice. Absolutely. We can get into the mainstream stuff, the popular culture stuff. People like that aspect of my theory. What you find, you see, is the symbols are everywhere. It's not just in circuses. That's kind of the origin story of it all. They've put it into all the films. They've put it everywhere, in every film you can imagine. I didn't mention this earlier, but the circus itself is a representation of the realm they are trapped in. Okay. So it's kind of like an enclosed system. It's full of psychedelic colors and lights and patterns. It's the same place people go when they're on DMT. It's the fractaled matrix, or the intergalactic circus, as some the people on DMT like to describe it as. It's this place where the clowns, the jesters dwell. And that's what the circus is. It's a metaphorical representation of where the demons are. And you find that the patterns that are circus themed are in a lot of films about demons. I think quite a famous one people like to point out quite a lot is Twin Peaks. Mm-hmm. I haven't watched the film myself, but I've seen plenty of clips from it, and I understand it's basically people are in this realm, aren't they? Which is where the demons are, and it's black, white, and red with black and white lines everywhere, specifically to describe this place that they're trapped in. It's this other realm, this demonic realm. Another great example was it's called Vamp. It's a film from the 80s. It's really terrible. But there's a lead character in there, which is one of the main vampires, and she does a strip tease on stage, and she is in full white skin with wild red clown hair. Okay. And she is dancing around a beheaded mannequin, which is colored in black and white patterns specifically. And again, it's just a black and white theme thrown in there. Beetlejuice is another great example because he is literally I reckon he may be an Azazel analog. I theorized with Vicky Joy Anderson about who this person was. And I think Beetlejuice is a part of the Orion constellation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's said that Azazel was hung on Orion's belt. Right. So I think that's who this is supposed to be a representation of, perhaps an angel Azazel, possibly. But in terms of Nephilim analogs, Beetlejuice has it all. He at one point turns into a human snake. There's the black and white snake in the dry lands, which is a realm you see represented in that quite a lot.
like a desert. And there's this black and white snake within there, isn't there, that eats things. And the dry lands are a biblical reference to where demons wander when they don't have a body to possess. So that symbolically enough is there. But then Beetlejuice is this black and white patterned, white-skinned, crazy-coloured haired giant. He's depicted as a giant many times in the film because there's a miniature scale model of the village, isn't there? And he's stomping around on it as a giant. You know, it's all there, you know, and I think they hint all the time, and they always have done for a very long time. Specifically, this black and white pattern thing is there quite a lot. Freemasonry itself, you know, the black and white checkerboard is there. That's again, I think it's a representation of the fractaled realm, the other realm, the matrix, the other side, the base which our reality is built on is where they are disembodied. You know, it's kind of they're in the code of reality, but they don't have any body to actually experience and manifest in the reality. That's where they're trapped, you know, and it's not a nice place. It's not a place you want to be forever. It's chaos. There's no form. It's impossible to be or do or think or have any moment of clarity there. It's not a great place for demons to be. They don't like being there. And it's kind of funny how people who take DMT, like I said earlier, they have this delusion that they're going somewhere better. You know, that they're seeing this amazing, beautiful, psychedelic world. It's like, wow, our reality is awful compared to this. And it's like, no. Where we are is the prize. We're in the place they want to be. Mm-hmm. Okay. Where you're going is a prison for those things there. They hate it there. It's chaos.
Right.
You know, they do not like it. It might look pretty and psychedelic, but that doesn't mean it's a great place to be all the time, 24/7. Count yourself blessed that you got to come back into your body. You may have taken them with you, you know. Mm-hmm. It's that type of thing. Like they crave to leave that place and be embodied once more. It's as simple as that. And that's what the DMT realm is. That's what the black and white fractal patterns you see in films represents. And that's why you often see these entities dressing in black and white pinstripe clothing. And if you go through the music industry as well, it's everywhere. I find most musical artists who have been up there throughout the decades in terms of fame and power and skill have dressed like a Nephilim. They've made themselves up to have white skin, crazy colored patterned clothing, wild hair, red hair often and not. Think of David Bowie as a quintessential example, you know. And they manifest amazing skills. And I do think they are channeling entities by dressing a certain way in order to gain the power and the skill to perform a certain way. Right. You know, I think it's the same principle of why shamans dress a certain way to evoke a spirit, be possessed by it, and channel the spirit in order to gain knowledge and wisdom and power. It's the same thing, you know, and the music industry is rife with it. You wonder why these people laugh about it like it's just a common trope that, yeah, people in the music industry dress weird. It's just what they do, you know. Why? There's a reason for that. It's not just to start a new fashion trend or be edgy. There's a reason for that, and they are channeling entities. It's a shamanistic practice. It's a practice as old as time itself. It was taught to humankind by the angels at the very beginning. You know,
music. Mm-hmm.
And especially music along with it. Yeah, you know, music itself, we could get into that, but that would be a whole other show about the power of music. But if we just look at the aesthetics of how musicians dress, they dress like Nephilim. They dress like clowns. They channel the same entities. You know, I've covered it recently in a couple of off-the-cuff videos about some modern rap artists, and you see it manifest quite a lot recently. And there are a lot of clown-looking artists these days who are really over the top with the clown stuff, like the wild, crazy red hair specifically seems to be one of them. I think Sia's quite a famous musician these days, and she's always going for the black and white look, and having her identity hidden under a strange blonde black and white wig. She's quite a big one. And I have this other theory on my channel, which I'm going to make more videos about, but I believe all the big artists, especially mainly women who end up in the charts and are played everywhere incessantly on the radios and get all the number one hits and are in the charts for weeks and weeks and weeks, you know, and these songs you hear on repeat, I think they are singing as though they are Lucifer. That's what you find. It's Lucifer singing to you through these big artists, these big female artists specifically. And if you listen to the lyrics and just stop for a second and just imagine, this is Lucifer saying these words. Mm-hmm. It matches perfectly to how he would think and feel. You know, and he was the prince of the power of the air. You know, he was in charge of all that kind of stuff and probably still is. And I think if all these little musicians and these underground artists channel demons and get to perform as though they're a demon, I think the big ones who get all the attention in the charts, they get to channel Lucifer, and Lucifer gets to be venerated as a god.
I think music, that's another topic. That's another rabbit hole. I mean, we can get into that another time. But you're right though. There's people out there who are middle-aged now, who are still trying to make it in the music business. Their whole world is twisted with music. They wake up with music. They eat, lunch is music. Dinner is music. They live it. It's an oppression. I myself enjoy music, but I'm not oppressed or have a obsession with it. I just don't. And back in the 80s, I'm an 80s baby. I listened to rock and roll. I listened to Motley Crue, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, all these dark bands now that I see now. But I grew out of that. And some people are still, 80s Arrested Development. They never grew out of that era. And even the younger crowd now, like in their 30s, mid 30s, they want to be pop stars. They want to be like, these pop artists, these women. They want dressed, scantily dressed, and sex sells music. And it's really sad to see it, because the chances of them going anywhere with it is probably nil. And even if they do, from what I understand, is you got to give your soul to the devil to make it in Hollywood. You really do.
Oh yeah. Well, they get selected. They don't get where they get because they're so talented. Okay,
right. That's
not how it works. And if they sing and say the right thing that backs up the agenda, and they can fit you into a specific niche within the huge agenda that they're pushing on people, then they'll select you and allow you to get big. And you'll think it was yourself that did it. Right. You'll think you made it because you're so great. Yep. And you will get incredibly full of pride, and you'll make a song rapping about how great you are. And look at me now, I made it. Everyone, all my haters can suck it. I'm the greatest. And it's kind of like, no, you're just a patsy. You're a useful idiot.
These
basically.
are all venerating the dead giants, the Nephilim spirits.
Yeah. You dress the part, you say the right things, yet you get to be a part of the system. And once we're done with you, we're done with you.
That's a lot of, that's crazy. It's a crazy world we live in. And, we've had so many topics on our show, and you have really great information. And this was great. We have to do it again on another topic. I like your information. You're really on point on a lot of things. And, wow, I'm just blown away by this show. Cause I was really interested. I was really interested in the clowns, the Nephilim look like clowns, because, you're right though, but inherently children don't like clowns. They know that there's something evil about it. And children are the most innocent, stage of human life, where they don't know, much about the world, but they do know things that are good and evil. That's what they do know. They don't know the ways of the world yet, but they can sense good and evil.
Absolutely.
And that's wild.
Coulrophobia, which is the fear of clowns, is a big fear. It's, there's bigger fears. Don't get me wrong, but it's up there. It's right. It's noted. It's quite well noted, and people have done studies on why people are scared of clowns. What does it come down to? And the mainstream understanding is obviously fundamentally they don't know. Right. They have ideas, and the main idea is it's the uncanny valley situation. It's almost human, but not quite. And that's just disturbing to us naturally. You see those dolls that are almost human, but not quite. That's quite a disturbing thing for us to see as well.
Right.
It's just the uncanny valley principle is a main driving factor of why people think it's not quite right. Mm-hmm. But another one is that people don't trust people in makeup because they can't understand their true intentions. They can't see their true facial expressions. So that makes people feel uneasy as well. And that's pretty much it. That's all they've got. They're the two theories. You can speculate on other things, but that's mainly their theories. The garish nature of it is one thing, but it comes down to a natural instinctual mistrust for something you can't understand, basically. Because another thing as well is, the old costumes for a clown. It's basically a fully grown fat man dressing like a baby. And that's pretty disturbing on its own, And I think people just are instinctually creeped out by that idea of a fully grown man dressing in such an infantile, childish way. And obviously you can get into the whole pedophilia aspects of all that, but it's again, that's probably another topic for another time.
It's the whole thing is perverted. Everything, all that stuff is perverted.
Absolutely. I didn't even touch on the murderous clowns throughout history.
We gotta have you back. I mean, this is not done yet. I mean, for the listeners out there, this topic is far from over. There's so many things to cover, so many rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, the Hat Man is another one we need to cover as well.
Dude, I tell you what. I mean, for me, I've had experiences with sleep paralysis, seeing dark apparitions, UFOs, monsters on my ranch. UFOs flying right over me. It got to the point where I was videotaping these UFOs.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that another time. But yes, these things are wild.
Well, good talk, guys. I think what have we got now? Two and a bit hours. We've gone for a while.
That's it. Let's go ahead and break away, and we'll definitely have you back on. Go ahead and give our listeners how to get a hold of you.
Like I said, you can always email me at understandingconspiracy@gmail.com. You can just type in Understanding Conspiracy into YouTube and you'll get to my channel. I do many other videos other than the clowns, but the clowns are the thing has become my niche. So check out the videos, see if you like it. I do a weekly show every Sunday, a live show. This one I've done with you guys instead now. So I've got my people listening right now.
Oh, nice.
I'm looking in the chat. I've got all the usual guys. But every Sunday I do a live show and a thing called a Truth or Therapy session. And it's where I basically get everyone together and we just talk about any topic at all. I usually give a little presentation about what my research is taking me, the odd book reading, things like that.
Oh, nice.
But we talk about anything and everything there. And it's just a place for conspiracy theorists and truthers not to feel so alone, because I know this stuff is really isolating for a lot of people. And I kind of like to offer advice on how to deal with it constructively and, not break down into the fetal position on the floor, basically. So I do a Truth or Therapy session every week as well as other videos. So
great.
Best way to find me is through YouTube.
Great. This is your host, Dominic Tavares from the Sabbath at Midnight podcast. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And if you'd like to support us, we're on Buzzsprout under the Sabbath at Midnight. This was a great show. We covered a lot of territory throughout antiquities, the giants, the Egyptians, the Masons. Got into a little bit of the music realm at the end. Clowns. Just watch out for clowns out there. It's a fascinating show. Paul, thank you for coming on. And just hang on for a bit after I wrap up here.
Sure thing.
This is your host, once again, Dominic Tavares with the Sabbath at Midnight podcast, signing out from someplace not too far from Area 51.